They thought I had already lost. They thought the old man had finally broken. I remember standing in the parking lot of the Hennepin County Courthouse on a Tuesday morning in late October, wearing a jacket that didn't quite fit anymore. I'd lost weight that year, more than I should have, and I could see my son-in-law's car already parked near the entrance. A silver Audi. New. I recognized it because I'd seen the bill of sale. It had come out of an account that used to have my name on it. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years running a small but steady commercial printing business outside of Minneapolis. Nothing glamorous. We did business cards, brochures, signage for local shops. I built it from a 2-room operation in a strip mall into something that employed 14 people at its peak. I sold it in 2019 for a number that surprised even my accountant. I wasn't rich by any standard you'd see on television, but I was comfortable, more than comfortable. I had taken care of myself and I had taken care of my family, and I genuinely believed that meant something. My wife passed in 2018, just before I sold the business. Pancreatic cancer. 8 months from diagnosis to the end. I won't talk about that more than I have to, except to say that after she was gone, I made the mistake that a lot of grieving men make. I let the people closest to me make decisions I should have made myself. My daughter had married a man I'll call my son-in-law, though that word barely fits anymore. He came into her life when she was 32, charming and loud in the way that some men are when they want to be liked. He worked in commercial real estate. He talked about investments the way some people talk about the weather, constantly, confidently, and usually wrong. My daughter loved him. I tried to love him for her sake. After the sale of my business, he started calling more often, dropping by the house, offering to help me manage the transition. I was grieving and tired, and I told myself that was just what family did. My daughter would sit across from me at my own kitchen table and talk about estate planning, about tax exposure, about how difficult it would be to maintain the house on my own. She wasn't wrong about any of it. That was what made it work so well. Over the course of about 2 years, between late 2019 and early 2022, I signed a number of documents that I did not fully understand. I want to be honest about that. I'm not a stupid man, but I was a tired man, and there is a difference. My son-in-law would bring papers over, already tabbed with those little sticky arrows, and explain them in broad strokes while my daughter made coffee in the kitchen. A trust here. A power of attorney amendment there. A change to a joint account that he said would simplify things. I asked questions. He answered them. I believed him because I wanted to believe that my daughter had married someone who was looking out for me. By the spring of 2022, I began to notice things that didn't sit right. The first was the statement from my brokerage account. I had a portfolio that I'd built slowly over 20 years, index funds, a few individual stocks, some municipal bonds, conservative, nothing exciting. I'd stopped checking it as closely as I should have after my wife died, because looking at the account meant logging into the same portal where I used to check her life insurance, and I wasn't ready for that for a long time. When I finally looked in April of 2022, the balance was about 40% lower than it should have been. I called the broker. He told me the account had been accessed and restructured under the power of attorney I had signed in November of 2020. I sat with that for 3 days before I said anything to anyone. The second thing was smaller, but it cut deeper. I was looking for a birthday card for my granddaughter. She was turning 7. And I went into my daughter's old bedroom, which I use for storage now, to look in a box where I kept cards and gift wrap. I moved the box and found a manila envelope underneath it that I'd never seen before. Inside were printed email exchanges between my son-in-law and someone I didn't recognize, a financial advisor with an office in Edina. The emails talked about my accounts by name. They talked about timing, one of them said, and I will never forget this. The old man doesn't check anything. We've got room to move. I put the envelope back exactly where I found it. I made a copy on my printer first. I didn't tell my daughter. I want to explain why, because I know how that sounds. I didn't tell her because I wasn't sure yet what she knew. I'd known her for 42 years. I'd watched her learn to walk in this same house. I needed to be sure before I said a word, because if I was wrong, I would lose her. And if I was right, I needed to be prepared. I called a man I'd done business with back in the 90s, an attorney named, well, I'll just say he handles estate litigation and elder financial abuse cases, and he has for 30 years. He'd sent flowers when my wife died. We hadn't spoken in a couple of years, but he picked up on the second ring. I told him I needed to meet him outside of his office, somewhere quiet. He didn't ask why. He just said, Tuesday, the coffee place on France Avenue, 10 o'clock. That meeting lasted 2.5 hours. What my attorney explained to me over terrible coffee and a table by the window was that what had been done was not simple theft. It was a sustained, methodical restructuring of my assets, using documents I had legitimately signed, exploited in ways I had not intended and had not understood. That distinction mattered legally. It also meant that untangling it would take time, and that the worst thing I could do was confront my daughter or my son-in-law before we had everything documented. He asked me one question that I wasn't ready for. He asked me whether I trusted my daughter. I looked out at the parking lot for a long moment. Then I said, I used to. He nodded like he'd heard that before. Over the following 5 months, I did something that went against every instinct I had. I acted normal. I had Sunday dinners. I answered phone calls. I let my son-in-law talk to me about the market. I asked polite questions. I smiled at my granddaughter's drawings on my refrigerator and felt something split slowly open inside my chest. I had a small camera installed in my home office. Nothing dramatic, just a device that looked like a router, bought online for $40, and I let it record. I kept a log of every conversation that touched on finances. I pulled every bank statement, every brokerage record, every document I could request going back 4 years. My attorney filed discovery requests I didn't fully understand. His investigator, a quiet woman I met only once, started building a picture. What emerged was worse than I had initially thought, and also in a way clarifying. My son-in-law had moved approximately $340,000 out of accounts that were either in my name or jointly held, using the power of attorney I'd signed and a series of transfers that were structured just below the federal reporting threshold. A technique, my attorney told me, that has a name: structuring. It's illegal. The money had gone into accounts in my son-in-law's name, some of it into the business he'd quietly incorporated in Delaware 18 months earlier. My daughter's name appeared on some of the paperwork. Not all of it. My attorneys said that was either careful planning or a sign that she hadn't known the full extent. He couldn't tell me which. I still don't know for certain. There was also the house I had signed, and I remember this now. I remember him saying it was just an estate planning measure, a document that had effectively made my son-in-law a co-owner of my property through a revocable living trust amendment. My attorney's jaw tightened when he showed me that one. He said if you died in the next 6 months, he would have had a credible claim to this house. I looked at the signature on the document. It was my handwriting. My hands had held that pen. I asked my attorney what we could do. He set down his coffee and said, quite a lot, actually. The first thing we did was revoke the power of attorney through a separate filing, done quietly, with no notice given to my son-in-law or daughter in advance. The second thing was to consult with a forensic accountant who specialized in tracing transferred assets. The third thing, and this is the part that took real courage, the kind I'm not sure I actually had, was to wait. My attorney filed a civil suit in late January of 2023. Elder financial exploitation, breach of fiduciary duty, fraudulent transfer. He also made a referral to the Hennepin County Financial Crimes Unit, which began its own investigation. I was not supposed to discuss this with anyone. I didn't. I went to Sunday dinners and I watched my son-in-law pour himself bourbon from a bottle he'd brought over. Bourbon he'd probably bought with my retirement savings, and I said nothing. I smiled. I told my granddaughter she was getting so tall. My daughter called me the morning after the suit was served. I let it go to voicemail. She called 3 more times. On the 4th call, I answered. She said, "Dad, what is this?" I said, "I think you know what it is." She started to cry. I want to say that part was easy, that I had prepared for it, but I hadn't. Hearing her cry still pulled at something in me in the old way. I pressed the phone against my chest for a second and looked at the ceiling and reminded myself what I had found in that envelope. Then I said, "I hope you didn't know. I really do. But there's going to be a process now, and you need to get your own attorney." She said, "Dad, please." I said, "Get an attorney." Then I hung up. The hearing in October was not the trial. It was a civil proceeding on a motion to freeze assets pending the full case. My son-in-law had hired a lawyer, a good one apparently, and he and my daughter arrived at the courthouse together, dressed sharply, my son-in-law in a charcoal suit, my daughter in a gray coat I'd never seen before. When I came through the doors, I heard him say something low to her, and she looked at me and looked away. There was something in her eyes I didn't recognize. Or maybe I recognized it too well. We sat on opposite sides of the aisle. My attorney was next to me, calm in the way that people who do this every day are calm. My son-in-law's attorney had a stack of folders. He looked ready. The hearing began. I'm not going to describe every motion because I don't fully understand every motion. What I understood was the shape of it. His attorney argued that the transfers were legitimate, authorized, consistent with estate planning instruments I had willingly signed, that I was an elderly man who had perhaps become confused about the nature of agreements I had entered into. He used the word confused twice. My son-in-law sat very still and straight. My attorney let him finish. Then he presented the emails. The emails that my son-in-law had sent to the financial advisor in Edina. The ones about the old man not checking anything. The ones about structuring the transfers. The ones, and I had not known this until that morning, my attorney had kept it back to show me at the right moment. That included a message in which my son-in-law had written that he expected me to be out of the picture within 5 years based on my health history, and that they needed to move before the estate complicates things. The judge read the email silently. She was a woman perhaps 10 years younger than me, with reading glasses pushed up on her head. She set the papers down. My son-in-law's attorney asked to approach. She waved him back. She looked at my son-in-law for a long moment. He had stopped sitting straight. The asset freeze was granted in full. The judge also flagged the case for referral to the county attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges. She did not raise her voice once. She did not raise her voice. My son-in-law's attorney was already leaning over whispering to him. My daughter had her hands in her lap and was staring at the table. She did not look at me. I looked at her. I am her father. I have been her father since the moment she arrived, early, in February of 1981, and I held her in my 2 hands, and she was so small I was afraid to breathe wrong. I have been her father through every year since, through the good ones and the ones that were hard. That did not change in that courtroom. It will not change. But I have also learned, late, the way some lessons come, that love is not the same as permission. That caring for someone doesn't mean letting them take what you built. That being old doesn't mean being finished. The civil case settled 8 months later. I recovered approximately $290,000 of the transferred funds. The house was fully restored to my name. My son-in-law entered into a consent agreement that included restitution and a period of supervised probation. And he and my daughter divorced the following spring. Whether that was her choice or his, or whether it was simply what happened when the thing they'd built together came apart, I don't know. My daughter and I are not close right now. We are not estranged. Not entirely. She came to my granddaughter's birthday in the summer, and we stood in my backyard and talked about the weather and the tomatoes I'd planted along the back fence. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had recently set it down. But her hands still remembered the weight. I don't know what she knew. I have decided, for now, to let that question stay open. There are some doors you can walk through and others you just have to stand in front of for a while. What I know is this. I built something. With my hands and my time and 31 years of early mornings. They thought that because I was old and tired and alone in a house full of my wife's things, I would not notice. They thought the grief had made me soft. Maybe it had for a while, but I did notice, and I remembered who I was before the grief found me. I'm still that man. There's a version of this story where I never opened that manila envelope, where I move the box, feel the weight of it, and put it back without looking. Where I go on signing whatever is placed in front of me at my own kitchen table while my daughter makes coffee 12 feet away. That version exists. It almost happened. And when I think about how close it came, I don't feel angry. I feel something quieter and colder than anger. What I've come to understand, not from a book, not from anyone's advice, but from living through it, is that the people who took advantage of me were counting on something specific. They were counting on the fact that grief looks like weakness from the outside, that a man who has lost his wife, who moves slowly through his own house, who doesn't check his brokerage statements for 8 months, must have also lost his judgment. They mistook exhaustion for surrender. That was their error, and it was a significant one. I've thought a lot about what actually protected me in the end. It wasn't luck. It wasn't the attorney, though he was essential. It was a decision I made in a storage room holding a manila envelope. A decision that came down to a simple question. Am I willing to know the truth even if it costs me something I love? Integrity, real integrity, isn't the kind you perform when things are going well. It's the kind that holds when the truth is inconvenient. When knowing it means your daughter might not speak to you for a year. When doing the right thing means sitting across a dinner table from people who are stealing from you and not letting your face change. That took something out of me I'm not sure I've fully gotten back. But I don't regret it. The intelligence part. And I mean that not as a compliment to myself, but as a practical observation. Was an understanding that emotion had to wait. Every instinct I had when I found those emails told me to pick up the phone and confront them that night. I didn't. I waited 5 months. I documented. I let the picture complete itself before I acted. People who've been wronged tend to move too fast because the pain demands motion. I had to teach myself that patience wasn't passivity. It was preparation. The difference between those two things was, in my case, about $290,000. And then there's the part I think about most, alone in this house in the evenings. The part that's harder to name cleanly. After my wife died, I stopped. Not grieving. That you can't stop. I mean, I stopped pushing. Stopped treating my own life like something worth defending. In some way, I can't fully explain, what my son-in-law and my daughter did, as awful as it was, forced me back into myself. Forced me to remember that I had built something. That I knew how to solve problems. That I was not yet finished. Whatever is taken from you unjustly as a way of clarifying what you actually value. I didn't fight for the money, not really. I fought because I refused to be the version of myself those emails described. The old man who doesn't check anything. The one they could move around. I checked. I moved back.